One of my favorite parts of working with retirees is getting to know someone's story. And each person's path is completely different, but all have pursued financial success in their own unique way. Now, with that said, after speaking to enough retirees, I have started to notice a few patterns and characteristics that come up over and over again. So today, I want to discuss the three types of retirees I see and share some advice for each one. So I do want to acknowledge something before we start. Trying to characterize tens of millions of retirees into just three categories is obviously an oversimplification. That said, I do think that these three personas capture some common threads that many of us can relate to in one way or another. They also give us a really useful lens to reflect on where we are today and how we can improve in the future. So, before we jump in, my name is Robert Wickfield. I'm a certified financial planner, and this channel is dedicated to helping you retire like a pro. So let's jump into our first type of retiree. Number one, the obsessive DIYer. So let me say this up front. There is absolutely nothing wrong with being a DIY retiree. My guess is that many of you watching this video are managing your own finances, investments, and tax strategies in retirement. So while I certainly believe there is a ton of value in having professional guidance, there are certainly retirees that have chosen not to use an advisor that have done a tremendous job on their own. Many DIY retirees have chosen to go at it alone for good reason, too. There are some amazing advisory firms out there that have very reasonable fees, they don't collect commissions, and they do great work for their clients. But unfortunately, not everyone has had that experience. Many unsuspecting retirees set up meetings with advisors hoping to develop a plan that positions them for success. But what they often find is an annuity sales pitch, extremely high fees, and an advisor that seems uninformed in the areas that matter most to their retirement. So, in my experience, playing an active role in your own retirement, even if you do have an advisor, leads to a better outcome for you and your family. But after having hundreds of conversations with retirees, I've certainly noticed some patterns with obsessive DIYers. And unfortunately, many of these behaviors can quietly work against a successful retirement. So I specifically emphasize the word obsessive DIYer as the first type of retiree. Let's talk through some of the behaviors I've seen and the negative outcomes they can create. So first, I often find that obsessive DIYers are constantly researching, comparing, second guessing. They've got endless spreadsheets, color-coded tabs, and detailed systems for tracking everything. But that information overload can actually work against them. Analysis paralysis is a very real thing, and sometimes that means making poor decisions or really no decision at all. So ironically, I actually find that the financially obsessive retirees tend to be the least satisfied in retirement. There's one scenario that in particular jumps out to me. We'll call this retiree Maria. Maria had done a fantastic job preparing for retirement, had about $3 million in a pre-tax IRA, another $1 million in a brokerage account. And on top of that, her pension and Social Security actually completely covered her living expenses. But despite being in an incredibly strong financial position, she was more anxious about money than most retirees with a fraction of her resources. She overanalyzed everything: which tax bracket to convert into, what funds to own, and which accounts to draw from first. The question of how much to convert to Roth was literally keeping her up at night. Now, none of those are particularly bad questions, but the obsessive nature of those questions was clearly interfering with a successful retirement. This same thought pattern can also make its way into overanalyzing investments, constantly checking on your portfolios, and so on. So, as I said before, I think that those who play an active role in their own finances, on average, have a more successful retirement. But as with all things in life, it's about balance and knowing when to take control and when to step back so you can actually enjoy the freedom that you've worked for. So, the obsessive DIYer is probably the most common pattern that I see, but it's not the most damaging. The next and probably most damaging pattern I see in retirees is number two, the grass is always greener syndrome. Some people may call this the shiny object syndrome, but essentially, this is the retiree who's always chasing the next big thing, the sophisticated investment, the tax-free miracle strategy, or believing there's a silver bullet to convert hundreds of thousands of dollars to Roth and not pay any taxes at all. There are a ton of products out there that promise growth without risk, and these types of retirees are the target market of these products. They're constantly being drawn in by something that sounds smarter, safer, or just plain better than what they already have. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And the advisor that's pushing it would probably be keeping it to themselves if it really was so lucrative. And look, I get it. When you've spent decades building wealth, it's natural to want to protect and grow it as much as possible. The problem is, there's no shortage of people lining up to sell can't miss opportunities. Things like private REITs with very high yields, exotic annuities, private notes, and tax-free retirement strategies that somehow promise all the upside without the downside. So where things go wrong is when retirees begin deviating from time-tested principles, trading simplicity, diversification, and discipline in exchange for something that sounds more sophisticated, but many times accomplishes the exact opposite of what you were hoping for. I've seen this dozens of times. Someone moves their money into something they barely understand, usually something that has been marketed as private, oftentimes even guaranteeing a level of returns with minimal or no downside. A few years later, and the reality hits that the opportunity wasn't what it was sold to be. Oftentimes, the grass is greener syndrome is motivated by curiosity and fear at the same time. And that emotional mix can lead to decisions that look clever on paper, but end up adding unnecessary risk and complexity, and usually disappointing results. The truth is, the best portfolios tend to be the least exciting. So the moment you start feeling like you found something special that no one else knows about, that's usually your first red flag. And it's not just investments. I've seen this in a ton of areas: estate planning hacks, secret Roth conversion strategies, and the list goes on and on. At the end of the day, a successful retirement isn't about chasing what's shiny. It's about sticking to principles that stand the test of time. So for retiree number 3, last but certainly not least, the scarcity mindset retiree. So picture yourself. You've done an incredible job saving, spent decades working hard, living below your means, and living in a disciplined way. And it actually worked. You've built a significant nest egg, you're financially secure, and by nearly all measures, you've won the game. But here's the problem. You can't stop playing defense. Even with millions of dollars and a retirement that is almost certainly a success, emotionally, you're still living like you're one bad day away from losing it all. You're hesitant to take vacations, and when you do it with a guilty mindset. Or those larger purchases that once felt like a lifelong goal now get put on the back burner. Ironically, the habits that got you where you are today are the same habits that can keep you from enjoying your hard work in retirement. Discipline, caution, and frugality are not inherently bad things. They're often the ingredients of achieving financial security. But what purpose does your newly amassed wealth serve if you never give yourself permission to enjoy what you've worked so hard to build? One of my favorite quotes is from the famous philosopher Seneca. "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." The truth is, a successful retirement is much more than maximizing your net worth. It's about learning to enjoy the freedom those dollars were meant to create. One of my favorite parts of being an advisor is giving retirees permission to chase that dream, take the trip, or make that purchase they've always dreamed of. So there it is, the 3 common types of retirees. Number 1, the obsessive DIYer. This retiree is brilliant at the details, but sometimes can't step back to see the big picture and take critical action. Number 2, the grass is greener retiree, always chasing the next shiny opportunity and neglecting time-tested principles. And number 3, the scarcity mindset retiree, someone whose discipline keeps them from enjoying the rewards of their hard work. As a retiree, if you can learn to recognize these patterns of behaviors, you'll be so much closer to achieving the retirement you've always dreamed of. Hey, thanks for watching. As always, if you have any questions at all, please leave those in the comments and be sure to check out last week's video where we discussed investing at all-time highs in retirement.